Hey, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're live. Whoa. We're supposed to do something drastic like this to attract your attention so you watch what we're trying to say. Hang on a sec. I'm going to go find my chair. Nope, you couldn't because it was muted, but it's not muted anymore. Hi, I'm Brad. That's Casey.
What's up?
Did you just shoot them?
I just
What was that?
finger saluted.
Yeah, see what kind of thing?
Finger saluted
We're trying
from
to
the
be
corner of my hat.
politically correct on here now. That was who did that politically? Was that Bill Maher?
Politically incorrect?
No, that was
I don't remember who that was.
politically incorrect.
It was an interesting show.
I don't
I
think
watched
it was
it a
Bill
few
Maher. I
times.
thought it was the other guy. The other.
Yeah, I don't remember what the name of that guy was.
Those days are gone. Those guys have shifted back and forth on the political spectrum. It's kind of weird.
I think everybody does. I think they do whatever the viewership would have gotten them.
They do, but I don't. On this topic, I was
They're
watching
TV
some of that
personalities.
because they start going this direction, and then when something happens, like here's an example. I think it was Bill Maher. He was on whining because Donald Trump misevaluated his properties and stuff. They're saying
Mm-hmm.
the valuation. He said it was inappropriate. Turns out that Bill Maher, I think if it's Bill Maher, he's got a house that he had sold where he misvalued it. So he's a hypocrite. And then you see these political people, the whole politics. I never really got into the politics and all that.
Right.
But when I see people doing that, and especially a comedian, because a comedian can say whatever the hell they want, and
Right.
it kind of sways the truth. It's funny.
Kind of.
Well,
I mean, it depends. I mean, if they're independent comedians, they can do whatever they want. If they work for somebody, they can't.
But they should be independent. But they're saying stuff that is sort of favoring one side.
Oh yeah. Typically, that's the way that it goes. You know, I've been watching so much stuff online right now about all these exposés about what's happening in Hollywood and with all of the music industry and everything else, and all these people who've been manipulated, and they're basically all talking about how they're told which way they should lean and what their beliefs should be and how they're supposed to talk about politics and all that kind of stuff. They're basically led at this point. So what you're getting isn't, especially on talk shows like where they're really popular on different TV channels.
Mhm.
You're not getting anyone's real opinion. You're getting what their opinion's supposed to be.
Sure. And I can see that. You know, if someone works for my company, I get to tell them what they can do or not
Right.
because it's my company. And if
Kind
you don't
of.
like it, we have to fire you.
Well, kind of. I mean, the whole entire point of the way that news was supposed to be is that it was never supposed to be that way. It was supposed to be unbiased.
The news was,
and
yes.
free and open. Well, all of these, the whole entire idea behind the way that modern television and everything else works, like most people don't even realize this, but the only way that they were able to buy airtime was if they did it as news companies. So they had to basically be like, okay, well, we're doing this. And then they basically had to sign a thing saying, we're going to provide news for this amount of time. That was the only thing they were really selling. They said, yeah, you can have other things, but the news is the thing you're actually obligated to do. That's the contract that you're buying. Is that you're buying this channel to do news.
Right. And then there's the underground stuff that this is what you're really buying.
Right.
And then
Well, I mean, look
they
at
kind of
how much
slide a
everybody
little
flops.
envelope over and stuff like that.
Oh
and
yeah.
say,
Well, look how everybody flops though. I mean, look even Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert, he used to be like totally on the indie side, more on the libertarian side than anything else. And then they basically offered him late night. And once they offered him the late night spot, he was like, oh, yep, nope, I believe whatever you say. And he gets on there and totally changed his tune about everything that he believed.
Well, I've said that about like a person's belief or perception will change with their environment.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and we've said it before, if you want to go extreme, a person is pro-life until someone walks into their house and tries to rape their daughter. Then all of a sudden they're pro-choice and they'll choose to eliminate that person that's looking to do that thing.
Right.
So your perception will change with whatever the circumstances are.
Yeah.
And that happens in, especially with the young influential people that I went to acting school and I want to be a star and I'm going to move out to Hollywood and make it. And they leave from Kansas City or whatever and go out there and they sold everything and now they're living in their like beat up old van or whatever because they're going to make it. And then someone says, you want to make it? Yeah, I want to make it. Okay, here's what you got to do. I don't want to do that. That's what you got to do. And those end up being the rules.
Yep.
Like,
it's true. Hollywood's full of them.
Well, the world is full of them. I had a friend that was, he's on the better side of the law now, but he didn't used to be. And we were at a club once and he said, I can shut this place down on the weekend. I go, how would you do that? And he explained how he'd do it. And just makes sense. He said he'd just come in there with a screwdriver in his back pocket and get out of the booth and cut just by accident. Whoops. Oh, geez, I'm sorry. Have other people do it. Pay somebody $20 to go get in a fight. I'm going to buy you a couple shots and a beer. I want you to start a fight and make sure you knock over some glassware. And eventually the restaurant's going to shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you could do that if you wanted to do it that way. That's the way the mob does it, right? Like, make places go out of business.
Yeah.
It's sad. It's the wrong thing to do, you folks. Well, here's what's dangerous now is people are doing with psychological methods, neuro-linguistic programming and all that kind of stuff. And that's not what we're supposed to be talking about right now. We're supposed to be talking about psychedelics.
Well, I think that actually does lead into it.
It just did.
It totally can lead into it. I mean, the reality of the situation is that, one of my starts with psychedelics, one of the big things that happened is I read a bunch of material on CIA research that they were doing, of psychological research that they were doing to brainwash people using LSD. That's Manchurian Candidates and all that kind of stuff is all based on that.
Well, so I've never done well, I take that back. I did do some blotter acid in high school, but you know much more about psychedelics than I do. So like if they're doing some of that kind of stuff and manipulating people's thoughts and stuff, is that because they put the chemical into them and now their brain is being rewired? So maybe they're like under the influence, so to speak, and now you start talking to them, so you're rewiring their neural connections?
It's more than that, and they usually, according to the research papers that I read, they usually used more than one method simultaneously. So there was a bunch of different methods that were involved, and in fact, some of the research they were doing was actually some of the cults that they were backing at the time frame. So, for example, Charles Manson. A lot of people don't realize this, but Manson was actually, the CIA actually funded some of his stuff very early on because they were curious about how it would work out. And some of the research that they were doing and some of the stuff that they were doing with cults ended up, they were talking about susceptibility to brainwashing. So what they really wanted to do is they wanted to figure out how Stockholm syndrome worked and things like that, and how it could be enhanced and how it can be achieved more quickly. And one of the major factors that they actually found at the time frame is, look up the research. Everybody's going to get mad about this one, so you'll probably get a lot of hits on this one. Watch this. And so, was veganism. I'm not kidding you. So one of the big things was that they actually had a lot of these cults at the time frame were all vegetarian, and that they forced people to not eat meat. What they found was that if people didn't eat meat, it's very interesting. There was papers that would come out every once in a while, and like different groups like the Star Wars Project and stuff like that, and they found that if you weren't eating meat, that it made you more susceptible to what other people were telling you is true. And it had something to do with the animal fats and proteins that were in it. and the way they interacted with your brain. So specifically red meat, if you can get people to stop eating red meat, that the effects would come on much quicker. But meat in general, if you got them to stop eating any meat, that you were able to transition people into having like a Stockholm syndrome or being like worked into a cult or brainwashed, any of those types of things much quicker.
So do you think that would have anything to do with like the reptilian brain? Because reptiles are like, are they meat eaters kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I really don't know if it would have to do with the. I'm not a neurologist. I don't study the way that the brain
I
works
wouldn't
in that
expect
way.
you to be.
So
I'm not either.
I'm not positive
I'm
about
just
that one.
pondering it because I look at things that are.
Most of the time, I do have an answer though, so it's actually it's one of those times where I'm like, I don't actually know this one.
Like the like meat supposedly makes you more aggressive, and I know that at that retreat center that I'm going to, they don't want you to eat meat. They want you to go on more of a vegetarian diet.
That has to do with the psychedelics though, because you're going to a retreat where they're doing ayahuasca. So if you're going to a retreat where LSD and ayahuasca, completely different. So what they would do with the ayahuasca is that if you're eating meat and you're eating anything heavy with ayahuasca, it makes you get stuck in your body. And you actually don't want that. You don't want it to be stuck, because if it gets stuck like here in a physical form, like it makes you feel like off and weird. And
oh, you mean the digestive system?
Yeah, because then your whole body, the energy stays like really in the body. So that's whenever you get things like spins and you start puking a lot and you get really uncomfortable and the diarrhea and all that kind of stuff. Like that all can happen with ayahuasca, but it happens like way, 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 way worse when you haven't been keeping a good diet. So if you end up having the wrong kind of diet,
I wonder if it still kind of has a commonality between LSD and ayahuasca situation.
Definitely not. They even affect different parts of the brain. The ergoline, which is the LSD, totally affects the brain differently. So, but going back to the studies, right? So basically, what they would do is that they would put people on basically a vegan diet, right? And you wouldn't have as much body store, so it would cause you to go into that kind of mode that you could go into with the starvation mode a lot easier by going further in between with these, the meals. They would have people take acid, then they would have people watch films that were specifically disturbing, like real like disturbing stuff, like slaughtering animals. They would like videotape a slaughterhouse, and they would just show them slaughtering of animals over and over and over again. Or they would show like war films, like from actually being there, like the most gruesome stuff that they could find,
right?
And things like that would cause them to have a disassociation happen. And they've done the study since then, and under different names, and they didn't always stick with LSD, but LSD is like that was the big one.
So did they ever do stuff with like ayahuasca?
No, as far as I know, I don't think that there's been any governmental research with ayahuasca. They've done it with ketamine, LSD. There's a specific there was a specific one that I found about mushrooms, but that one was incredibly short-lived. They found that it actually helped people with things like remote viewing, because they were studying remote viewing, but they found that it was actually too connecting for their purposes. It actually it helped people be more connected and more aware, instead of causing them to have any ability to be disassociated. Like,
so
there was
some of the CIA stuff,
no
kind of like the
stuff.
Jason Bourne stuff.
Kind of. I mean, it's kind of, yeah. I mean, Manchurian Candidate, they've made a movie out of that. They have other ones like that, but basically, yeah, they were trying to they're basically trying to induce a dissociative personality disorder, which is split personality, basically. And then they can control whatever the split personality is to make it a military weapon.
So stuff like that could probably be used for good and for bad. depending on what you're programming them to do.
I'm not really sure that you could use that for anything that's good. I can't think of it. I mean, you have to do some really awful things to cause somebody to get to that kind of
But what if
point.
you did the opposite? You said you show them movies that have really icky stuff in it. What if you showed them movies that have really good stuff in it?
Well, you would never have the disassociative moment that because you have to have the break. That's actually what they're trying to do is they're trying to break somebody.
I mean, really good stuff. They're showing you really bad stuff. Why can't they show you really good stuff?
Well, really good stuff is going to make you, it's not going to make you
Happy.
have that, but it's not going to have you have that high stress psychotic moment where you go and you disassociate. They're trying to have that forced disassociation so that way they can control that dissociative state.
That's kind of interesting that it only works one way.
It's because that's the way the brain works. The brain causes us to disassociate whenever we have something horrific that happens. It's very interesting that.
So the brain does not. It's
know,
interesting that the brain doesn't disassociate if you have something that good happens.
Unless you have a dissociative personality disorder in which you disassociate all the time.
But if it's good, then maybe it's not such a disorder. Maybe it's a good order.
Well, it's not necessarily a good thing that they disassociate. It just is. It's just the way the body,
Like what,
the
what
body
it
and the
is used for
brain end
good,
up.
and a person was like, it's the kind of person that just likes to break stuff. They're violent and they're angry and they want to hurt people and you started doing the same thing. You gave them the drugs, the LSD or whatever, and then you started showing them good stuff.
You wouldn't need to show them anything good. You just give them some LSD and they'd be okay.
Okay.
All the studies that they did
Well, there you go.
back in prisons and stuff like that, where they did the psilocybin studies and the LSD studies. They showed that it lowered recidivism rates among violent offenders because they no longer wanted to violently offend after receiving these. They actually felt more connected to the people around them, even though they were in a prison. They actually felt more connected with the people around them. And it lowered violence overall in those prisons, in those wards where they did it. Yeah, we talked about that last time, I think. Yeah, they stopped doing it because it worked too well. And they were like, yeah, we need those prisoners. Makes us money. So they stopped doing it. But yeah, so it's, but yeah, it was Manchurian Candidate. And then I can't remember what the other ones are, but they've actually had a few movies on it where they talk about these CIA studies that they did. And there's another guy who really fun to watch his stuff. He's Museum of Tarot. He actually reads bits and pieces out of the studies every once in a while. He does a lot of research on psyche and altered states. And
I find it interesting that sometimes they have these movies that come out and they seem to kind of run parallel with the political situations. And it's weird because how can they get the movie out that fast?
Hollywood and the CIA, you know,
they're kind of working together. That's just one of those conspiracy theories, but it's
unless you lived there, in which case you very well know how much it's in bed with each other. I mean, it was really well known back in the day how much the CIA was involved in everything in the area. I mean, crack cocaine wouldn't have ended up being what it was if it wasn't for the CIA. They were directly involved in a lot of that. It was all kinds of crazy stuff that happened on the West Coast. CIA was
okay.
Very
So
much
we've been
involved
talking
in
about the negativities. It seems like with the criminal and the CIA and the underground and
it's
all
hard
that.
to not have negativities.
So
when
what
you're
if we
talking about CIA.
flip this and we'll talk about the psychedelics and the mental health benefits of psychedelics?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
We'll see what kind of topics come out when we cast out all of our little video shorts and see what gets the juice. It'll probably be the bad stuff.
Probably the bad stuff. I would guess the bad stuff. But yeah, so LSD actually does have an improved amount of connectiveness with people. You have to purposefully do a lot of really bad shit in order to have somebody have that kind of a problem. So there was a whole methodology that they used behind it, including putting little a la Clockwork Orange, taking little clamps up and open their eyes and make them watch a bunch of things.
Yeah, it's creepy.
Yeah.
We're still in the creepy.
Yeah, Clockwork Orange was based off of real studies they were doing.
That's so weird.
It's so weird. But going back to, you were saying more positive stuff. So like LSD actually normally has the opposite effect. It makes you be more connected. And psilocybin in particular makes you feel more connected to nature. So it's the only one that has a marked increase in connectiveness to nature. I mean, they have people rate all those types
You
of
mean
things
that
they
while
feel.
you're walking through nature, you just have more appreciation for it, and
You feel more a part of it.
you hear the water flowing through the creek, and you see the leaves.
It's a feeling. It's a feeling people get, because there's like, so basically the way they did is they had psychological questionnaires that they would ask people before they would do it, and then they would ask people these psychological questionnaires afterwards. And then they would have self-reporting questionnaires that they would have all over, like Erowid, right? Which I've mentioned Erowid before. It's a great place to go if you ever want to read trip reports.
Spell it.
EROWID.org.
Eurowood.
Erowid.
Oh, like Euro? Like Euro? Oh, he's got to look it up now.
No, it's EROWID.
We'll see if the AI picks up on it.
Yep. So, but anyhow, Erowid has a lot of stuff where it's like trip reports and stuff on there. They've been keeping trip reports since the 90s on there, maybe even earlier. But it's actually one of the oldest. It actually was a BBS to begin with. So it's, once the internet shifted to what it is today, they started keeping, the track of it, and they've been keeping track of it ever since. And so they have literally hundreds of thousands of trip reports on there now, and you can go on there and search for, like mixing psilocybin and MDMA or ayahuasca and other things. And they have like the good, the bad, and the ugly on there. They
I was
have
just
some
going to
stuff
say
that's
that
like
you might
not
get
very good.
you might get a little bad and ugly when you start mixing this stuff.
Oh yeah, I don't ever recommend people mix. It's really common.
Well, that's
actually.
what activates ayahuasca, is the mixture of two things.
Mm-hmm. It's actually really
what do you
common
do?
for people to have bad mushroom trips if they do mushrooms and then smoke like really big bong hits. It like sends them into a bad trip.
Don't do that.
It's really common. It's actually really interesting. And people are just like, oh yeah, it totally enhances the trip. And then they do it on purpose until they have these really bad trips. And they're like, oh God, I don't ever want to do that again. And then they're doing it again. And it's like, oh, you guys are idiots. Why are you doing that? But this stuff is like, I don't recommend people mix it.
Well, where do you draw the line wherein people are doing it recreationally versus for spiritual healing or mental health or whatever?
When it comes to psychonauts, it's actually a little bit difficult to tell the difference.
Psychonauts.
Well, psychonauts are people who actually really believe in the stuff,
Like
and they do it a
astronauts?
lot. Yeah. So they do it a lot. It's what they do for recreation.
They're almost addicted.
No, I wouldn't call them addicted. It's just that, a lot is, if you're going to do it more than once a month, you're probably a psychonaut.
But not addicted.
No, you can't. It's non-addictive. You can't become addicted to. There's no psychological dependency or anything that happens with any of the things.
Then why do they do it? Just because they like it?
They're delving into the psyche. They want to delve into the psyche, and they want to go in as far as they can go. They're interested in the altered state.
So there's a fine line between obsession and addiction, huh?
Definitely a fine line between obsession and addiction. Well, I mean, so Joe Rogan is a good example. Joe Rogan actually used to do a lot of psychedelics. I don't know if he still does a lot of psychedelics, but whenever he was doing Fear Factor and everything like that, all back in the beginning, he was really into doing psychedelics. And in fact, he was like one of the early I don't want to say adopter, but he was like one of the early people who talked heavily about doing DMT. And if I remember, I'm pretty sure it was Joe Rogan, or it was somebody that Joe Rogan was talking to during that time frame. But there was this one where they were talking about having float tank, right? And they did intramuscular DMT injection during that time frame.
That sounds icky.
Yeah, while they were inside the sensory deprivation tank or float tank, right? It's like
Intermuscular,
injection.
I
Yeah,
mean, hypodermic.
yeah, yeah. DMT. Yep. And I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And I mean, it's been a long time since I heard about this. It was like
That's where the stuff starts
1998.
getting.
I remember this
The
from.
stuff starts getting weird to me. Like there was a guy I knew that had this after hours club, and they would drink and all the time. And then a guy came in and gave him a IV thing to electrolytes to get over the hangover.
Yeah, my aunt does that for a living. She's a nurse and she does
That's crazy.
hydration therapy.
Because they're drunk. Getting hydrated is one thing.
Well, she
They just
doesn't.
drink water.
She doesn't do it while they're drinking, but she does it
No, it's after
for
they're
people
drunk.
with hangovers. Yeah,
I think quit drinking.
she'll go in. There's
That's addiction.
there's clients that'll hire her, and they'll go out and they'll party like all weekend, and then they'll hire her on Sunday before they have to go back to work. And they'll have her come in, and they pay a lot of money. And some of these people are like, "Oh yeah, I'll just do it for everybody here." And
That's addiction.
people there and everything else. And then they do hydration therapy, and it basically gets rid of the hangover and gets rid of all of the negative effects from their partying of the weekend in 30 minutes.
I had another question before I asked that question, and that question took me off my rail. Dagnabbit. Because it was about the psychedelic stuff. Oh, that's what it was. Joe Rogan. Do you think that maybe his participation in psychedelics, because he was a karate guy and a comedian, and then he did Fear Factor, and then all of a sudden UFC and his own show made him all popular. Do you think possibly it was the psychedelics that rewired his brain so he's thinking differently now and talking about maybe more stuff rather than just Fear Factor and comedy?
Talking about psychedelics, I think, is actually what made him famous.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Wow, that might happen to us.
Yeah, I
Be
actually
sure to like and smash the
so
button.
he was talking about he was talking about early on altered states, and he would talk about going into meditative altered states. He talked about on Fear Factor, one of the reasons why he thought Fear Factor was a cool show was because he actually, it's like some of those things that would put you in altered states was, like going through some of that stuff they had to go through. They could put people in altered states.
You mean because they're so scared of tarantulas that
Yeah.
they're in a different state of mind? Right.
The hyperventilation and all that kind of stuff. And that's where I first learned about float tanks. I'm pretty sure whenever I was hearing about the DMT and the it's not a separate sensory deprivation tank, but it's the closest thing you can get without going into a giant medical facility. They're float tanks, and they're basically a sensory deprivation tank, but you don't actually submerge completely in the water. They're fascinating. Like anybody who's never done a float tank, I'd recommend it. But
I didn't like it.
it's
slimy.
Awesome. You probably
you don't notice it, but
you probably have that soft feeling because of the amount of salts that's in it.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
it was okay just being in there, but then when you get out, it's slimy. But
it's kind of a weird feeling. Yeah.
No. There's a guy that started it's called Avatar. So it's more of a philosophy. And he talked about getting in one of those things where it's dark, you can't see anything. It's quiet, can't hear anything. You're in this body temperature water floating. So you don't really feel anything.
Yeah.
And you can taste your own saliva and stuff, but eventually that's neutral. And you're like, okay, I don't have any senses anymore. What's left? Then you pull the plug and go down the rabbit hole. That's when the weird shit happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So I bought an hour in a float tank, and it took me a good 20 minutes to half an hour to even get into it. So like, because for the first like 20 minutes, your brain just starts running. You're just like,
Oh, you didn't want to get into it because it was going to be dark and going to be quiet?
oh no, I was totally fine. I hopped in there right away. I was happy. So like, but for the first 20 minutes, it's like all this noise in your head.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean?
And even like you're in there and it's quiet and just a little bit of water.
Yeah,
It's
and you
like,
keep on trying to pick up on sounds and feelings, and like your brain is really trying to pick up on all of that. And it
sure.
took about 30 minutes for my brain to finally go, okay, I'll stop. And that's whenever it starts to get really interesting. So if you put yourself in those float tanks, it's a great way to get into an altered state. You put yourself in one of those float tanks for an hour and a half. After about 30 minutes, you start to go into these gamma wavelengths in your brain. Like your brain starts to go into a meditative wavelength, and it's very interesting. So Joe Rogan actually did a thing where at least I think it was Joe Rogan did a thing where he slept in it. He would actually sleep in them, and he talked about sleeping in these float tanks and how you only need a fraction of the amount of sleep in a night, because once you go into your REM sleep, you spend longer times in your REM sleep, and you go deeper into that REM sleep, and it's like you're in a meditative state that entire time. So you need far less sleep being inside those float tanks.
And you don't spend so much time rolling over to readjust your blood flow and all that stuff, so you're not awakening all the time. You're
Right.
kind of deep right away.
Yeah, and your blood flow is perfect. And of course, the air is filtered, everything, so you can breathe great.
I wonder why it would take so much time to get into an altered state.
I think if I did it more often, it would probably be much easier.
But I
But
mean, if you think about it, okay, you turn out the lights, it's dark
yeah,
immediately.
yeah,
You turn off the sound, there is no sound immediately.
right.
You're in the tank, you don't feel anything immediately. So
Pretty
all
much.
this stuff, and it doesn't take that long for the electrons to zip through your brain, does it?
No, but I think it takes that much time for your brain to like
Quit thinking.
relax. Yeah. I mean, I suppose if you were like a champion meditator who meditated like every single day, and you were able to put yourself inside a meditative state, like, if you're able to just like sit down and be like, okay, I'm going to meditate now. And you could do those 3-minute meditations. Like I have had points in my life where I can do that, but not right now. I mean, with so
It's
many kids running around and
it's
everything else,
kind
I
of
just
an
don't get that much
interesting
practice.
thought that, like, if a person dies, say you die suddenly, is your brain still thinking for 20, 30, 45 minutes?
Well, they say that your brain does actually continue to run for a little while.
But nobody really knows.
Nobody does, because if you're able to be brought back, you didn't die that quick.
But if you don't get brought back, where do all those thoughts go for 20 minutes? You've been sitting around thinking, damn it, I knew I shouldn't have threw that match in that big thing of gunpowder. Damn it.
Yeah. Oh
I
man.
knew it. I knew I shouldn't have done that.
I should have went and turned off the electricity first.
Yep. They told me I'd probably shut that off first. So that you're thinking about all the dumb shit you did. Okay. We went down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
It's not even a rabbit hole anymore.
But yeah, the whole thing with the Joe Rogan and back in I'm pretty sure it was either like 98 or maybe 2000, 2001 at the latest, because I heard about it before I moved out here. And yeah, at least I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so 2001 at the very latest. And essentially what I recall in that interview was that he was talking about DMT and then doing it inside this deprivation tank and going all the way in. And he was like, he was like, yeah, it was some of the craziest shit he'd ever done, and it was super fascinating. And then he was talking about all the stuff he'd seen, and it was wild. It was a whole wild trip. But they were, yeah, he was talking about how amazing altered states were at that time frame. And then if you fast forward a little bit, you fast forward to like 2008, he was talking about whenever he was doing like, he was talking about UFC, and he would interview a lot of people from that. They were talking about microdosing, and they were talking about mushrooms and use of mushrooms in altered states. And a lot of these fighters swear, that it actually gives them a sixth sense.
Mhm.
Like they can actually see the blow coming before it actually comes.
I can see that in that
Mhm.
the visualization. When I was in high school gymnastics, there was this, we used to call him Halvey Hotz. He was really good on the high bar. And he used to meditate. And everybody thought it was kind of stupid that he did that, but he was really good on the high bar. So he was visualizing himself going through his routine. So he knew how to do what he was doing because he saw himself doing it perfectly. And now he gets up on the high bar, he does it perfectly.
Right.
So there could be something to be said for that you get into that altered state and now you know how to fight.
Well,
Because you do sense stuff. I mean, I got a martial arts background. You
yeah,
can kind of tell if someone is going to be doing something
right.
and you can react to it before it even happens. So
Yeah, you did
I can see that.
Taekwondo, right?
It was originally traditional Taekwondo, and then I went and moved into more sport karate, which is basically the same but different without regimentation and the militia type stuff.
Right.
Traditional Taekwondo is like Korean,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
sport karate is more like, yeah, we're going to play the Rocky theme and work out. A little different.
Yeah. I've always thought Taekwondo was a extremely effective sport.
Um, any martial art, I think, is a good thing for someone to get into because I believe it saved my life. You learn how to react to stuff. You know how to, your balance is better, your
Hmm.
timing is better, your periphery and stuff is better. Because I had a situation where I had a car that wouldn't start really good in the winter. So I was working at this place in this building, and I left the building to go start my car at lunch.
Hmm.
And it was cold out. I didn't have my jacket, so I was running back in, and I'm running across, and I see this big white Cadillac coming, and it was a slow motion thing. I'm thinking, shit, I'm not gonna be able to stop because it's too slippery.
Yeah.
And I'm going, oh, can I outrun it? I don't think I'm going to be able to outrun it. So I drove my knee up as high as I could, and I got myself up there. I still got a dent in my calf right here where the car hit me. I went flying. My shoe fell off. It ripped my jacket. I fell down. I get up and I run to the car, and she goes, "Are you all right?" And I starts laughing because her cigarette had broken, and it was dingling right there. She goes, "You okay? Are you okay?" He's going about 30, 40 miles an hour.
Yeah.
But if I would have froze, it would have hit me in the hip and she would have ran me over. It might have killed me.
Right.
But in that split second, I had the ability to think, can I outrun it? Can I stop? I need to go up. That's my
Yep.
only direction. And it, I went back into the office and I said to the supervisor, like I said, I got to go home and check something out because my leg was really shaking.
Yeah.
And I want to see if it was broken and stuff. He goes, what happened? I go, I just got hit by a car. He goes, what? I said, yeah, I just got hit by a car. And he saw the snow and stuff all over my pants. But I believe it saved my life. And then multiple times working
Yeah.
on the car, I remember carrying a battery and I slipped on the ice and I started to fall. And I was thinking this is going to hit my elbow and the battery was going to smack it. So I had the ability to tuck it in the
Yeah.
right time. And I've had a lot of situations like that where I catch myself and you don't fall. So I think martial arts is a great thing for someone to get into just to understand that, even if you don't win a bunch of trophies and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
It's good
Absolutely.
for you.
I studied Sun Tzu, so
Mhm.
that was what I learned, and I did that for many years. My dad actually went a lot further in martial arts than I did until he got injured. I I I only did martial arts official training for I think it was a year. But my dad kept training me
Well,
outside of
what
that.
happens with it is when you first start out, they advance you faster, and then when you
Yeah,
get farther up there, like in our style was white, gold, green, purple, brown, red, black.
yeah,
So from white to gold, it's like 30 days.
Hmm.
And then it ends up being like 60 days, and then it ends up being more. And so people usually quit when they're like purple or brown belt,
Hmm.
because you feel like you plateau and you get bored. You're not
Hmm.
really learning, but you are learning. It's just a longer span. And
Right.
that's when people usually drop out. And sometimes
Sure.
it's right before they're ready to get their black belt. They just and they quit.
Right.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like the person I went to go train with that did the Sun Tzu. He didn't really do stuff with belts. They were, the Sun Tzu does. They do belts, but the person I was training with, they were like, yeah, we don't really care about that. And a lot of Sun Tzu was about learning like various different like techniques and stuff like that, where you were learning certain sequential actions. But when they would actually talk about it in the philosophical side of it, they said that you're really only learning that because they're teaching you the moves that go in that and how to react to certain things. But Sun Tzu, because of the style that it is, like it was not, there was no contact.
Is that the Sun Tzu Chung Mu Quan? Is
Sun
that
Tzu, Sun Tzu Kung Fu,
okay?
West Coast. It was it was a martial arts style that actually came from China just before uh, World War II broke out, just before the Japanese invaded.
Hmm.
And basically, the story goes that the guy who ended up bringing it, like his dad knew what was coming, and so he sent him away.
Oh,
He was like, "Yeah, so we're about to go through civil war and all this bunch of stuff. You need to leave." And what happened is once the Japanese got there, what they would do commonly is that they would go in during this time frame. They would go in there and they would challenge the leaders to a fight. And if they would beat them, they would say, "Ha ha, your kung fu is old style." And then they would get all pissed off, just like in the old kung fu movies.
right.
And they would be like, you suck. We're better. Mhm. This is why we're superior." And they would use it as propaganda. And if they would lose, they would take machine guns and kill everybody in the whole school.
That ain't good.
Yeah, and that's what happened to his school.
Yeah, we didn't.
So it basically it got wiped out in China during that time frame because of that reason. And but
We'll
it
wipe
was
it out.
yeah,
Well, we didn't use guns in our style.
yeah, no, they didn't use guns in Sun Tzu either. But Sun Tzu was what they called it was a street art, and what they meant by that was it was literally meant for killing. It was meant like the whole point of it was for an actual real scenario where you were going to be in a fight for your life.
That sounds like the Russian Krav Maga, that kind of
It
stuff.
it was very similar, yeah. So Krav Maga is yeah, because Krav Maga they don't it's one of the things that they just do not use in MMA. Krav Maga they will not use. Same thing with Sun Tzu. They don't use really Sun Tzu. You don't use anything you learn in Sun Tzu and
Yeah,
MMA.
you can't do like the fish hooking and eye gouging and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's taking it too far.
There
But
is one fight I've actually seen online that had Sun Tzu in it. And it was the guy was like a black belt in Sun Tzu and he was a Green Beret and he was in somewhere, it looked like he was maybe in the Philippines or something like that. And one of the special forces from the other group, they called him out. And he gave an interview on it years later, but basically there was like a whole group of them and he was by himself and they were like calling him out. And so he felt like he was kind of cornered into the fight. And so he he was kind of standing there getting ready for the fight, and then the other guy went up like he was going to fight, like, oh, and he started doing all this martial arts stance and everything else, and the other guy just kept his hands at the ready. And as soon as the other guy went to go hit him, he jumped back out of the way of the punch and just went bah, right to the guy's face. That was it. That's all you saw. And the guy stopped, went like this, and then went boom, and just hit the ground. And the whole group of the people went over there, and they were like, "Whoa, what happened?" And apparently, so the guy talked about it years later. The guy actually lost his eye, and what he did was he used a straight fingers.
Oh.
Right, he said he was intending to hit the pressure point right here, and he was just slightly to the left. And so he said, yeah, you know, I struck out and I felt something very squishy, and I knew that was the end of it right there.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the kind of moves you learn in Sun Tzu. I mean, a lot of martial arts are about, you know, like, oh, you strike like this, you move like this, you do like this, and it's like certain types of blocks and everything else. And Sun Tzu, it's like, okay, so if the person does this, this is how, if they have their arm extended like this, here's how you grab them and strike them in order to shatter their arm. This is how you shatter their jaw. This is how you crush their Adam's apple. Here's how you strike the temple with the right kind of force to end the fight. It might end their life, but it might save yours. So
there was
it's a
for a
very
while we
different
were in
form
the
of art.
traditional AAU Olympic style,
Yeah.
and that was they wore this thing called the hogu. It was like a pad with bamboo strips in it, so you can hit really, really hard into the gut and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And there was no punching to the face. You could kick to the head, but you couldn't punch to the head. So all
Yeah.
these people were learning to keep their hands down.
Mm.
And then if they ever got in a real fight, that ain't going to work good.
No.
So
No.
so sometimes it's not good to be trained that way.
Right.
You might think you're going to be okay, but you're not. I remember seeing a guy that did. He was a yellow belt, and he used to fight with his hands way down. And then there was this David Kim. He was this Korean kid, and he had this wicked spinning heel kick. And sure enough, he took it and took the guy's jaw out. And there was a big lawsuit thing going on. But
Wow.
put your hands up, man.
Right. I was watching this really interesting fight the other day. It was obviously from a fight club because there was like no ring, no anything like that, just a bunch of people all standing around. And this guy was like clearly an amateur. He gets in there and he's doing capoeira, where he's doing like all the like dancing back and forth and all the spins and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, "Whoa, look at me!" And then they clearly called fight, and the other guy's just standing there like this, like this, just waiting for the right time. And the guy goes, "Hoo hoo," and he spins in like this. He's like head over heels, spins in to get close, and then he was gonna like try a strike whenever he righted himself. The other guy stepped into the spin, waited till his head was on the way up, and struck down. Bam! Knocked him right out. And the captions was, "Oh yeah, so this is a newbie. This is the 20-year vet." I was like,
stranger things have happened.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty funny. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think we've talked about martial arts very much,
We
but
have
martial
not.
arts, I think, truly are a very important thing. And my father, it's probably one of the reasons why going into the realm of psychedelics was very easy for me, because it's an alternate state of mind. And my father totally believed in mind over matter, and he would talk about that all the time. And there's actually a newspaper clipping of my father and the rest of the people that he was training with whenever Sun Tzu was still pretty young. And this was in, I believe it was in Santa Fe Springs, California. It could have been Norwalk. It could have been in Whittier. Those were the three different areas I know that he did stuff at. But the newspaper clipping back during this time frame was of these young men. They basically, the trainer went to a demolition site, and he paid the demolition crew to pull out the people with the sledgehammers and everything else. And he said, "We're not going to need you. Could you guys just leave and just take a break for the day here?" And gave them money to go away. And then he used it as training, and he had them go in there and basically kick down walls and pillars. So they were kicking these concrete pylons, and that's actually the newspaper clipping is of them kicking these concrete pylons, and you see pieces of the concrete flying off of the concrete pillars they're kicking it.
Have you ever watched those Thai boxers kicking down like trees?
Yeah, it's
With their shin?
intense.
I saw that live once. The guy had 3 baseball bats hooked up to this 2x4 frame, and then a
Yeah.
couple guys holding it, and the guy rips at it with his shin. It's like, bam, 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 bam. It's crazy.
It's insane. Yeah, my dad, before my dad was injured, that was the kind of stuff that they used to train. And they did the old school training too, where on the hands, like you would beat the crap out of your hands. That's the style I learned. You would beat the crap out of your hands. So you'd have like they started with sand.
Yeah, pound sand.
Yeah, literally. And you would slap the sand as hard as you could on both sides of your hand. You'd slap the sand, and sometimes you'd break capillaries and you get these like weird marks on your hands. And I did that. And then you'd start to strike into the sand, and then you'd work your way up to like bigger size pebbles. And then by the end of it, they have these big vats that are on top of hot coals that they would sit on there where it would heat it up, and you have like lava rocks and crap in there. And they have like, those people have massive calisthenics. I never got that far, but they'd be, going like this.
Take it seriously.
Yeah. And it's not like they were just going, ugh, like trying to jam it in there. You did that with the sand, but you didn't do that with the higher level stuff. But they would rake these coals, and they were lava rocks. So, normally they'd cut your hands up. Hot lava rock like that would normally cut you up. But they'd be doing this and didn't do much to their hands. And then they would practice by hitting cinder blocks. They'd just be striking cinder blocks. They'd start palms, fist, palm, fist. They would just break through these cinder blocks like they were nothing, and they they'd build these walls, and they would literally like the guys that I knew who would do this like religiously. They would literally take bricks, lay a brick wall, wait for that one to dry, and go over to the next one, start striking that one until they break the brick wall, and then they go back to the other brick wall as the next person's laying. For that one, they go break the next brick wall down.
Yeah, we used to do that. We do demonstrations and stuff. They use the patio bricks.
Yeah.
Not a brick wall, but I remember a guy, his name was Byung-Yu Lee. He was in Brooklyn Park. And he did his thing with the ridge hand like this, and he had these skinny arms. And he'd roll his sleeve up. He had these skinny little arms. And this way, and then he back fisted it, and then he punched down. He had 4 bricks, those patio bricks, and then he had 4 of them over here, and then he had 4 of them here. And I thought his elbow was going to break, that little toothpick arm, but no, he goes right through him. It's kind of bizarre.
Yeah.
So the mind over matter kind of thing is definitely
mind over matter.
Because when you're breaking boards and bricks, you can't think you're not going to make it, because you got to think past it. Otherwise, it ain't going to break.
Yeah, you're learning to strike past it. That's my father always taught me whenever I was learning how to punch and how to kick. He goes, "You're not trying to punch them. You're trying to punch an inch through them."
Yeah,
and
then it will break.
And the other thing that I really learned, and this was actually probably the thing that surprised people, because I was pretty small too. I was not like, my arms and everything were pretty skinny at this time frame. Whenever I was a kid. And living where I lived, you had to learn how to fight. So I had plenty of opportunity to practice it. And and he would and they would talk about, like, when you strike, not only are you going an inch through them, but you snap it at the end. So it's not, you're not just pile driving people, you're not a pile driver. You snap it. And
That's you.
Yes.
Told you.
So the basically the vibration that you would create from the impact, from snapping it on the impact, would actually causes the bones to do a vibration. So they actually will break themselves on the rebound. So they don't actually break on the impact. It's actually after the impact, whenever they bounce back, where they actually break. It's fascinating. It's
complicated.
Yeah, but I didn't learn about that at the time. My dad explained it, and I'm like, that's interesting. But I didn't learn the actual science of that, how it was actually the return that broke it. until years later I was watching a show where they were showing martial artists and they were actually doing slow motion cameras on those they would do those body gels to make it, you know, feel and look like a body. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It's like ballistic gel, and then they put like they would use like a pig skin and all kind. Sometimes it was a pig carcass, and they would put sensors all over them, and then they would use slow motion cameras to watch them and everything else. And the slow motion cameras would pick up on it, and whenever they would hit, you would see the vibration of it because they would ripple out, and you would watch literally the bones would go in, and then they go out and snap, and they'd break, and everybody was shocked by it whenever they were seeing it. They're like, oh, it's actually on the return where they're breaking. It's not actually the hit itself. It's fascinating.
It is.
Yeah, the human body is way more capable of
The
things
human
than
body
people
is
know.
it's amazing what it can take.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
My father was never supposed to walk again. He was in an industrial accident with glass. The glass actually broke, spit out hot glass at him. And it was already broken. They just didn't put the label on it. So they knew that it was broken, but they didn't have the label on it. So it was an unsafe type situation. So he poured all of the crushed glass into this machine that was supposed to reheat, moltenize the glass, and then bring out new glass sheets. And he took the new glass sheets. And, you know, the type of, you know, guy that my dad was at the time, he practices martial arts all the time. So he would take these big barrels of glass. He loved the work because of the you know, the strength that was needed to do his job. Like most of the guys would have to pick these barrels, or they'd have to use a forklift or something else. My dad would take the end of the barrel, he'd kick the bottom of it to start the rotation, snap it up in the air, and then catch it upside down and pour it out. And that was how he was getting his workout in the day. And he was like, yeah, I loved the workout. So he would pour these into the glass machine, and then he hit the start button on this glass machine, starts spitting out hot glass at him. He had glass embedded all over his body and lit him on fire. And this big old, he said a guy had to have been like 400 pounds, came and like big fat guy came and went to go put him out. And because they were trying to smother it, and he was freaking out. Whenever you're freaking out, it makes it really hard to put you out. They didn't have an extinguisher nearby like they should have. So, you know, definitely OSHA violations all over the place, but this is before OSHA existed. And they jumped on him. This is like, I think a year before I was born, so like 78. So the guy jumped on him to try and put it out, and my dad's leg was in just the wrong position. And it snapped his leg in half, twisted it around. He ended up looking at his own foot.
Yeah.
And he was in such shock afterwards. This is what they were able to figure out from all the witnesses nearby. Like, he didn't remember any of it. But he, after he got put out, he was like in a daze for a few moments. And then he's hearing the whistles. And he said that's the first memory he has. He's hearing the whistles going off, saying that there was an alert. And then he grabbed his leg. This is what the rest of the people all said. Grabbed his leg. He goes, that's weird. I can't walk. And he goes, he snaps it back into place, throws it into place, goes, all right, there we go. And then he gets up to go walk on it. And he's in such shock. His body's in such shock. He doesn't realize that he's in extreme amount of pain or anything else. And he gets up and he goes, oh, it's time to go home. And he goes to go get his stuff. And they're all like, what? Where are you going? And he goes, oh, there was the whistles to go home, right? It's time to go home. And they're like, no, you need to sit back down, man. And rushed him to the emergency room and everything else. Years later, they actually had to take tumors out of his head from the glass that was still there.
Good God.
And that was whenever I was like, I had to have been like 10, 11 years old. But yeah, he was never supposed to walk again. And he said it was only because of his martial arts training and mind over matter.
I suppose.
That he taught himself to do it again.
Willpower.
Yeah.
So we're at 6 o'clock. It's been an hour. We'll end with a psychedelic experience.
Talk about psychedelic
it wasn't
experience.
Real.
Woo! Yeah.
It really was real.
That was a real one, yeah. You can have a traumatic experience and go through a traumatic experience in order to have your mind over matter moment and prove to yourself that really our minds are more powerful than the physical reality we live in, or you can have an artificial one. I would say you probably want to opt for the artificial one.
That's right. It's not as painful. Well, it could be because you could have a placebo type of pain. You might think that it's real. Even though it's psychedelic, it doesn't have to be hallucinatory.
I've never run into that one.
Huh?
I've never run into somebody who hallucinated a bunch of pain.
Well, I thought you can do that. Couldn't you die because you thought you died? To be continued.
To be continued.
Okay, let me sign this off. Remember what I always used to say. Be good, be kind, be nice. Got to hit the little end stream here.
Yeah.
Okay, see you later. Bye.